It was the night before Valentine's Day, and Anna and Michael had just moved into their new home. The house, though old, had a charm to it. A historic building with oak-paneled walls, intricate carvings, and a wide garden that seemed to stretch endlessly. The previous owners had lived there for years, but had mysteriously disappeared, leaving no trace behind. Anna and Michael were excited. They had found this house online, and after months of searching, it was the one that felt perfect. The day before, the move had been filled with hectic packing and last-minute purchases, but now they were settled in, and Valentine's Day seemed like the perfect occasion to make the house their own. "I think this place is going to be perfect for us," Anna said, standing by the large window that overlooked the garden. The room smelled of old wood, and the furniture they had brought with them seemed oddly out of place but comfortable. Michael nodded, but his thoughts were elsewhere. He glanced at the old fireplace and then back at the window. Something about the house felt heavy, as if the walls were holding secrets. That evening, the couple decided to start their Valentine's Day celebration early by purchasing roses. Michael suggested they go to the local flower shop just down the street. It was an old family-run store, known for its vibrant flowers. The shopkeeper, a frail elderly woman, greeted them with a knowing smile. She wrapped up the roses, tied them with a red ribbon, and handed them over. "These roses are special," she said in a low voice, her tone almost a whisper. "They carry the weight of love and of loss. Handle them with care." Anna raised an eyebrow but smiled, brushing off the woman's cryptic words. Back at the house, Michael placed the roses in a vase on the kitchen table. The deep red petals looked beautiful against the white porcelain. But as the night wore on, Anna couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. The air in the house had grown colder, despite the fireplace crackling merrily. Michael kept checking the windows, muttering that the wind was picking up. At first, Anna thought he was being overly cautious, but then she saw it. The roses, once standing tall in their vase, had begun to wilt. It was subtle at first, just a slight bending of the petals, but by the time they had sat down for dinner, the roses were drooping, their once vibrant color fading into a sickly brown. "That's strange," Anna said, leaning in for a closer look. "They were perfect when we bought them." "I'll go get some water for them," Michael said, standing up. He returned moments later with fresh water, but the roses still appeared lifeless. Anna frowned. She had read about flowers reacting to certain energies, but this was unlike anything she had ever seen. She turned to Michael. "Do you feel it? It's like the house is breathing." Michael looked at her, his face pale. "I don't know. Maybe it's just the cold air messing with me. The house is old and the draft." Anna nodded but still felt uneasy. As they settled down to watch a movie in the living room, the strange sensation of being watched settled over them, like an invisible presence lurking in the corners of the room. The more she tried to ignore it, the stronger it became. Later that night, after they had gone to bed, Anna woke up to the sound of whispers, soft, indistinguishable murmurs that seemed to come from the walls themselves. She sat up, heart racing. Michael was fast asleep beside her, unaware of the growing tension in the air. She stood up cautiously, making her way down the hallway toward the living room. The floorboards creaked under her weight, but she was too frightened to care. As she stepped into the living room, she saw something that made her blood run cold. The roses had bloomed again, but they weren't the same. The petals were a deep crimson, darker than anything she had ever seen. They shimmered in the dim light, casting an eerie glow in the room. Anna's breath caught in her throat. She stepped closer to inspect them, and as her fingers brushed against the petals, they felt strangely cold, unnaturally cold, as though they had been dipped in ice. A chill ran down her spine. The whispers grew louder, and Anna realized they weren't coming from the walls anymore. They were coming from the roses. The next morning, the house felt suffocatingly still. Michael had no memory of the previous night's disturbances, and Anna hesitated to tell him. She didn't want to seem paranoid. She chalked it up to stress from moving. But deep down, she knew something wasn't right. Determined to uncover the truth, Anna went into town to do some research. She visited the local library and asked about the house, its history, and the previous owners. The librarian, an older woman with a stern face, hesitated at first. But after a few moments, she pulled out an old newspaper clipping. The house was once owned by the Hartleys, the librarian explained. They were a wealthy couple, known for their extravagant parties and lavish lifestyle. But one Valentine's Day, something happened. The wife, Rebecca, disappeared without a trace. The husband, Charles, was never seen again either. Anna felt a chill crawl up her spine. She asked the librarian for more details, but she refused to give anything else. "That's all I can tell you," the librarian said. "Some things are best left forgotten." But Anna couldn't shake the feeling that this house, the roses, and the dark whispers were all connected. She returned home later that day, her mind racing with questions. As she walked through the door, she noticed that the roses were in full bloom again, their petals even darker than before. That night, the whispers became clearer. The voices seemed to be calling her name. "Anna!" She turned sharply, expecting to see Michael standing behind her, but there was no one there. Suddenly, the air grew colder, and the temperature in the room dropped. Anna's breath misted in front of her as she heard a voice, soft, almost seductive, whisper in her ear. "Leave this place." As Anna began to uncover more details about the tragic history of the house, she learned that Rebecca Hartley had been murdered. It wasn't just a random disappearance. Charles, it turned out, had killed his wife in a fit of jealousy when he discovered her infidelity. But Rebecca had come back, not in the way he expected. Her vengeful spirit lingered, angry and restless, cursing the house for eternity. It wasn't just her death that haunted the place, but her love, the betrayal, the anger, and the grief that had consumed her. Anna had unwittingly become part of this haunting, and as she realized the truth, she also understood that the roses were no mere flowers. They were the symbol of Rebecca's love, a love turned to vengeance. The night before Valentine's Day, Anna had a choice. The roses had turned black, their petals twisted and darkened. The whispers were louder now, almost deafening. But Anna had learned something else too. The only way to free herself from the curse was to perform an ancient ritual, a sacrifice. She had to choose between Michael and herself. As the clock ticked closer to midnight, Anna made her decision. Anna stood at the center of the room, the roses before her, their blackened petals twisting and curling in a way that seemed unnatural. The whispers were louder now, their voices unmistakably clear in the silence of the house. "Leave this place, or join me in eternal love." The words echoed in her mind, laced with a strange, compelling energy that made her feel both terrified and oddly comforted. It was as if Rebecca, the restless spirit that haunted the house, wanted something from her, something more than just her soul. She wanted Anna's willingness, her surrender to the past, her acceptance of a fate that had been cursed for years. Anna's hands trembled as she reached for the roses. They had become a symbol of everything that had gone wrong in this house. She could feel the darkness closing in on her, the weight of the past pressing against her chest. Her thoughts turned to Michael, her partner, her lover, the man she had built this new life with. She thought of the bright future they had imagined together, of the dreams they had shared of a home, of family, of love. But that future seemed to be slipping away with every second that passed. Anna could sense that the house, the roses, and Rebecca's ghost were all part of something much larger than she had ever anticipated. It was a love twisted by jealousy and betrayal. The curse wasn't just about revenge. It was about making those who lived there a part of the love that had died, a love that had never truly ended. But Anna knew she couldn't be part of that. Not now, not ever. The idea of being trapped in this cycle, consumed by the pain of someone else's life and death, horrified her. As the clock neared midnight, she made her decision. She would end it, end the curse, end the haunting that had gripped this house for far too long. But in order to do so, she had to destroy the roses. Michael stirred in his sleep, unaware of the storm that was brewing around him. He lay peacefully in their bed, his features relaxed and free from the dark weight that had settled over Anna. But she could not rest, not yet. The roses in the living room beckoned her. Anna knew what she had to do, though it was a decision that would change everything. The ritual was simple in its requirement, but deadly in its consequence. With trembling hands, she reached for the matches. She had found an old book buried in the attic, a forgotten journal of the Hartleys, filled with notes on the rituals that had once been used to bind the spirits. The words of the spell were etched into Anna's memory now, despite the horror that accompanied them. It was a simple incantation, a phrase that would sever the tie between the spirit of Rebecca and the house. The ritual required one final sacrifice, the destruction of the object that had been the symbol of Rebecca's love, her roses. She stood there staring at the vase, watching the dark petals tremble as if alive. The whispers, once soft, now roared in her mind, demanding her to stop. The voices of the dead echoed, pleading with her, desperate for her submission. "Do not deny me, Anna. You will never escape. You will never be free." But Anna couldn't. Not after all this. Not after learning the truth about Rebecca, about the love that had been twisted by rage and resentment. She had to let go. She had to choose her future with Michael, not be chained to the ghosts of the past. With one swift motion, she struck the match and set the flame to the roses. The fire roared to life immediately, the flames dancing high into the air, consuming the roses as though they had been waiting for this moment. The room filled with an acrid smoke, and Anna's eyes watered. The whispers became shrill, frantic, angry. Rebecca's voice was almost unbearable now, a shriek of desperation and fury. "You can't escape me! You can't! I will never let you go!" But Anna held her ground. She watched the roses burn, their petals curling into ash, until there was nothing left but the smell of smoke and the fading echoes of a ghost's anguish. As the last of the smoke dissipated, a strange stillness fell over the house. The temperature in the room returned to normal, and the heavy atmosphere that had been pressing on Anna's chest lifted. The whispers, once deafening, faded into silence. For a long moment, Anna stood there, staring at the remnants of the roses. The house was eerily quiet, as if it were holding its breath, waiting for something. Then the sound of footsteps echoed from behind her. Anna turned quickly, expecting to see Michael standing there, but there was no one. She called out his name softly, her voice trembling. "Michael?" No answer. She ran to the bedroom, her heart pounding in her chest. When she opened the door, she found him sitting on the bed, staring blankly at the wall. His eyes were wide, unblinking, as though he had seen something terrible. "Michael?" Anna whispered, approaching him slowly. "Are you okay?" He didn't respond. He just kept staring, his expression frozen. Anna's heart skipped a beat. This wasn't right. This wasn't like Michael at all. She reached out to touch his shoulder, but as her fingers brushed against him, his head snapped to the side. His eyes met hers, empty, hollow, devoid of the warmth she had once known. His mouth twitched, but he didn't speak. In that moment, Anna realized the terrible truth. She hadn't just destroyed the roses, she had destroyed the curse, and in doing so had condemned Michael to a fate worse than death. Days passed. The house felt empty, though Anna was never alone. Michael was still there, but he was a shell of the man he once was. He moved mechanically, never speaking, never engaging. He would stare at the walls for hours, his eyes glazed over as if he were seeing something only he could see. Anna knew she had made the right choice in ending the curse, but she couldn't shake the guilt that gnawed at her every waking moment. Michael had changed. Something had happened when she performed the ritual, something that wasn't supposed to happen. One night, as she sat on the couch, the sound of footsteps echoed again, but this time it wasn't Michael. It was the sound of something, or someone, moving through the house. Anna stood up, her heart racing. She felt an overwhelming sense of dread, as though the house itself were alive, breathing, watching her. She grabbed the flashlight and moved cautiously through the rooms. As she passed by the hallway, she saw a shadow dart quickly across the floor. Her breath caught in her throat. She wasn't alone. The house, this cursed, haunted house, was never going to let her go. The roses were gone. The curse had been broken. But Anna had learned a terrifying lesson. Some things were meant to be left alone. Some love, twisted, dark, and dangerous, would never release its grip. And no matter how hard she tried, she would always be a part of the house's twisted history. As the night settled around her, Anna felt the chill of the past wash over her once more. It would never end. She had made her choice, but the house had already claimed her. And Michael? He was never coming back. The whispers had started again. Stay with me, forever. It had been a routine day. Emma had woken up early to prepare breakfast, cleaned the apartment, and had a few calls with her friends. She was looking forward to the evening, to the surprise Mark had been talking about. They had been together for almost 2 years, and though their relationship was relatively quiet, it was comfortable, peaceful, and filled with trust. She'd seen him earlier in the morning when he kissed her goodbye before heading out to work. He had seemed so excited, practically glowing, as if he were carrying the weight of a secret he couldn't wait to share. That made Emma smile. He wasn't usually the type to be this enthusiastic over gifts or surprises, so whatever it was, it must have been something special. As the clock ticked by and the hours stretched, Emma found herself drifting in and out of her thoughts. The anticipation was building, her heart racing with curiosity about the surprise. She couldn't help but wonder what it would be. Jewelry, a weekend getaway? Her mind raced with possibilities, but nothing could have prepared her for what she was about to face. Mark came home just before sunset. The door creaked as it opened, and Emma turned to greet him, her face lighting up with a warm smile. But as she saw the expression on his face, her smile faded. He looked different, cold, tense. There was a darkness in his eyes that made her uneasy. "Hey," she said, her voice tentative. "Everything okay?" Mark didn't respond at first. He merely stared at her, his lips pressed into a thin line. After a long pause, he walked toward her, holding a small, perfectly wrapped box in his hands. "Happy Valentine's Day," he muttered, his voice unusually low. Emma took the box from him, her heart pounding. His distant demeanor unnerved her, but she didn't want to make him feel bad. After all, he had promised her a surprise. She didn't want to seem ungrateful. But the feeling of unease only deepened when Mark stepped away, standing at the far side of the room, watching her intently. There was no excitement in his eyes, no warmth in his smile. It was as if he were waiting for something, waiting for her to open the box. The red satin ribbon was smooth under her fingertips as she carefully untied it. She took a deep breath, her hands shaking slightly as she removed the top of the box. Inside, nestled in the velvet lining, was a small pouch. It was delicate, almost dainty, and the soft glimmer of something metallic shimmered faintly through the fabric. But it wasn't the object inside that caught her attention. It was the smell. A metallic scent, like rust and iron, lingered in the air, heavy and unnatural. "Mark?" Emma said, her voice wavering. What's this?" Mark remained silent. His expression was unreadable, but his eyes, those cold eyes, never left hers. She hesitated for a moment before reaching into the pouch. As her fingers brushed against the object, a wave of nausea hit her. There, hidden beneath the folds of velvet, was something she hadn't expected. Something that turned her stomach and made her blood run cold. A severed finger. Emma stumbled back, her breath catching in her throat. Her eyes locked onto the grotesque object in her hand. The skin was pale, cold to the touch, and the nail was painted a shade of crimson, like the blood of an animal. She let out a strangled scream and dropped the finger, her hands shaking uncontrollably. "No, no, no!" Emma cried, stepping back from the box, panic flooding her system. "Whose finger is this, Mark?" Mark didn't flinch. He didn't seem surprised. He simply watched her, his expression growing more intense with each passing second. "It's from him," Mark said, his voice dangerously quiet. "The man you met last week, the one who was flirting with you at the bar." Emma's heart skipped a beat. She couldn't believe what she was hearing. She had barely exchanged a few words with the guy at the bar. He had been persistent, yes, but she had turned him down. She hadn't realized Mark had been watching from the shadows, his eyes glued to her every move. "I didn't do anything," Emma pleaded, tears welling in her eyes. "I swear to you, Mark, I didn't." But Mark stepped closer, his gaze darkening. "You think I wouldn't find out? You think I wouldn't know? You think you can lie to me?" His voice was low, almost guttural now. "I've been watching you. I've been watching both of you." Emma's stomach twisted into knots. Mark's hands trembled at his sides, but there was an intensity behind his gaze that sent a chill down her spine. This wasn't the man she knew. This was something else, someone else entirely. He was obsessed, and she had become the object of his obsession. Mark's words echoed in the room, heavy and suffocating. Emma wanted to run, but she was paralyzed, trapped in her own home with the man she once loved, now turned into a monster before her eyes. "You think I'm crazy?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper, as if trying to convince himself more than her. "You think I'm the one with the problem?" Emma shook her head. "Mark, please, this isn't you. This isn't real." But Mark wasn't listening. He was beyond reasoning. His fixation on her, on their relationship, had taken a dark, twisted turn, and Emma realized with growing horror that there was no escape. Not from him, not from this. "I did it for us," he said softly, his voice trembling with a mixture of rage and love. "I couldn't let him take you from me. I had to protect you, Emma. You'll see. You'll thank me one day. I promise." The room seemed to close in on her as Mark stepped forward, his hands reaching out for her, his fingers trembling. With a surge of adrenaline, Emma snapped into action. She pushed Mark away, stumbling backward, her mind racing. Her heart pounded in her chest as she scrambled to think of a way out. She dashed toward the door, her legs nearly giving way beneath her. But before she could reach the handle, Mark grabbed her wrist, yanking her back with terrifying strength. "No, Emma," he said, his voice thick with desperation. "You're not leaving me." For the first time since this nightmare began, Emma fought back. With every ounce of strength she had left, she kicked and screamed, struggling against his grip. Her mind was clouded with fear, but her survival instincts took over. She couldn't let him win. Finally, with one desperate shove, Emma broke free and bolted for the door. She threw it open, racing down the stairs of the apartment building, not daring to look back. Mark's voice, distorted by madness, echoed from above, calling her name, pleading with her to return. But Emma didn't stop. She couldn't stop. She ran and ran, not knowing where she was going, only knowing that she had to get as far away from him as possible. Sarah had never been a fan of Valentine's Day. For her, it was just another day filled with forced romance, overpriced dinners, and a constant reminder of the pressure to find the perfect partner. But this year, she had been feeling different. It had been 2 years since her boyfriend Eric had passed away in a tragic car accident, and she still hadn't fully healed. Her friends had encouraged her to move on, to put herself out there and try to meet new people. But Sarah couldn't. Every time she thought about dating again, she would feel a wave of guilt wash over her, as if she was betraying Eric's memory. She hadn't even been able to bring herself to take off her engagement ring. But this Valentine's Day, something felt different. Sarah had been going through some old boxes of keepsakes, and among the faded photographs and letters, she found an old envelope. It was addressed to her in Eric's handwriting, and the sight of it sent a jolt through her chest. She had never seen this letter before, and it seemed to have been written long after his death. The words on the front simply said, "For you on Valentine's Day." Torn between curiosity and caution, Sarah carefully opened the envelope. Inside was a single sheet of paper, handwritten in Eric's familiar handwriting. "Sarah," the letter began, "I hope you're doing well. I know this might be strange, but I need to ask you to do something for me. If you're reading this, I must have left you far too soon. I never got to say goodbye, but I hope that you can find peace in knowing I loved you with everything I had. There's something I need you to do, something that I couldn't explain at the time, but I trust you'll understand now. Go to the old house on Maple Street, the one we talked about buying together. There's a key hidden in the attic. Please go there on Valentine's Day and find it. Don't be afraid, I promise you'll understand once you see it." The letter ended with, "I will always be with you." Sarah sat frozen for a long time after reading the letter. Her mind raced, trying to make sense of what she had just read. How could Eric have written this letter after his death? Had someone else written it? Was this some sort of cruel prank? Or was it a message from beyond the grave? Despite her doubts and confusion, Sarah couldn't ignore the letter's plea. She hadn't been to the house on Maple Street since Eric passed, but it had always held a special place in her heart. They had dreamed of turning it into their home, but after his death, she couldn't bring herself to go near it. But now, with the letter in her hands, Sarah couldn't resist. She had to know what Eric meant, what he had left for her. The old house on Maple Street was everything Sarah had remembered, and yet it felt entirely different. It had been vacant for years, and the once beautiful structure now stood as a decaying shell of its former self. The lawn was overgrown with weeds and the windows were clouded with grime. The house seemed abandoned, forgotten by the world, much like Sarah had felt in the years since Eric's death. She stepped out of her car, the gravel crunching beneath her boots as she walked toward the front door. Her heart pounded in her chest, a mixture of excitement and dread. She couldn't help but wonder what she would find inside, and why Eric had chosen this place for his final request. The door creaked open easily, as though it had been waiting for her. Inside, the house smelled musty, as though no one had been there in years. The floorboards groaned beneath her feet as she made her way through the dimly lit rooms. It felt as though the house was alive, holding its breath, waiting for something to happen. Sarah made her way up the staircase, her eyes scanning the worn walls, the faded wallpaper peeling at the edges. The attic door was just at the top of the stairs, a small wooden door that seemed almost too small for the rest of the house. She opened it slowly, the hinges squealing in protest, and stepped into the attic. The space was cramped and filled with old furniture and boxes covered in dust. It was clear that this was where the house's memories had been stored, forgotten, and left behind. Her eyes swept the room, searching for any sign of the key Eric had mentioned. She moved toward a large wooden chest in the corner, its surface cracked with age. As she opened it, the smell of mothballs and old fabric filled her nose. Inside, she found several boxes of photos and letters, mementos from a life she had once shared with Eric. But it was only when she reached toward the top shelf that she saw it, a small, tarnished metal box. It was hidden behind a stack of old books, almost as if it had been waiting for her to find it. Her hands shook as she opened the box. Inside, there was a single key, old and worn, with a symbol etched into the metal. The same symbol that had been on the envelope with Eric's letter. Confusion and fear swirled inside her, but she couldn't ignore the feeling that the key was important. It felt like a piece of a puzzle she had to complete, a piece of Eric that was still with her. After taking the key, Sarah felt an odd compulsion to leave the house immediately. She wasn't sure why, but something in her gut told her that she needed to find where the key belonged. She clutched it tightly in her hand as she left the attic and made her way down the stairs. As she walked through the house, she noticed something strange. Whispers, soft and barely audible, they seemed to come from the walls, the floor, even the air around her. She paused, looking around, but saw no one. Just the empty, decaying house. The whispers continued, growing louder, more insistent, and Sarah's heart began to race. They were calling her. She couldn't explain it, but she knew she had to follow the sound. The whispers led her to the back of the house, to a small door that she had never noticed before. It was hidden behind a bookshelf, almost as if it had been deliberately concealed. Her hands trembled as she inserted the key into the lock. The door creaked open slowly, revealing a narrow, dark hallway. The air was thick, and the atmosphere grew oppressive as she stepped inside. The whispers grew louder, echoing off the walls. But Sarah couldn't turn back now. She had come this far. The hallway seemed to stretch on forever, but then at the end, she saw it, an old rusted door with the same symbol she had seen on the key. The whispers were deafening now, urging her forward, and without thinking, she reached out and turned the handle. The room beyond the door was nothing like Sarah expected. It was small, almost claustrophobic, and filled with strange, faded paintings. The walls were covered in symbols, drawn hastily, as if someone had been trying to seal something away. In the center of the room was a large wooden chest, its surface marked with the same symbol from the key. A chill ran down Sarah's spine as she approached the chest. The whispers were now a full-blown cacophony, filling her ears and drowning out everything else. She could hardly breathe as she reached for the chest, but before she could touch it, the room seemed to shift, the air growing thick with dread. Suddenly, she heard a voice, low and familiar. "Sarah." Her heart skipped a beat. The voice was unmistakable. It was Eric. She turned around quickly, her eyes scanning the room for any sign of him. But the space was empty. The whispers grew louder, turning into screams, and the chest seemed to pulsate, as if it were alive. The voice spoke again, clearer this time. "Help me, Sarah." Her hands shook as she reached for the chest and opened it. Inside there was nothing except for a small torn piece of paper. On it were the same words Eric had written in the letter, but now they were smeared with something dark. I never wanted to leave you, but I had to. They made me." As the last word was read, Sarah felt something grab her, pulling her into the darkness. The room around her began to spin, and the whispers reached a crescendo. Then everything went silent.